As the war in Ukraine drags on, now past the 2.5-year mark, the truth about Russia's staggering losses is becoming impossible to ignore. While the Kremlin stays silent, the mounting graves across Russia tell a chilling story. In 2023 alone, Russia has spent $2.5 million expanding cemeteries, a grotesque sign of the war's true human cost. This isn't just a statistic. It's double what was spent in 2022 and 6 times the amount in 2020. But the real horror is what's still to come. At the current rate of death, experts predict Russia's troop losses will surge to 1 million by 2025. Think about that, 1 million soldiers gone. The last time a single nation saw such devastation was during World War II, a cataclysm that reshaped the world. Now Russia is hurtling toward this grim milestone in a war Putin refuses to stop, dragging his country deeper into the abyss with every passing day. So how has it come to this? How did one of the world's most feared military forces turn into a machine that consumes its own soldiers faster than it can replace them? And how long can Russia continue throwing men into the meat grinder before it collapses entirely? When you wage a futile war with brutal intensity and reckless persistence, the relentless slaughter of soldiers and civilians becomes an inescapable reality. Here's how Russia's President Vladimir Putin has driven his country and his people toward this devastating milestone, reminiscent of history's darkest years. As of August 28, 2024, Russia has lost precisely 618,960 troops in Ukraine, according to the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces. This figure includes both fatalities and soldiers who've been so severely injured on the battlefield that they're no longer able to serve. If you're wondering about the proportion, The Economist reports that for every Russian soldier killed in action, there are roughly 3 to 4 wounded. A leaked document from the US Department of Defense leaves room for an even higher number of losses. According to this document, between 462,000 and 728,000 Russian troops have been killed, injured, or captured in Ukraine since the invasion began on February 24, 2022. That's substantially more troops than Putin initially prepared for the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, with 190,000 soldiers moving into Ukrainian land on that fateful February day. These staggering figures make one thing abundantly clear. Ukrainian soldiers are making the invader pay heavily for every inch of ground gained, even if they're paying quite a high price in the process too. However, whether it's 600,000 or 728,000, this figure is still a few 100,000 soldiers short of 1 million. So how exactly could the projected loss of Russian troops reach this mind-blowing figure in a relatively short period? To answer this question, all we need is some simple maths. Let's use these figures presented by the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces, as it's been publishing daily reports about the situation on the Ukrainian front line. Relying on these reports, we'll see how many troops Russia lost in a single week in Ukraine. As we mentioned, the last available report prior to writing these words was on August 28th. On this date, the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces put the total troop losses at 611,190 soldiers. Let's go back to August 21st to examine the trajectory of the Russian troop losses in a single week. On August 21st, the report published by the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces stated that Russia had lost 603,010 troops since the beginning of its invasion of Ukraine. The very next report, republished on August 22nd, put the total number of lost soldiers at 604,140. This means that in a single day, Russia lost 1,130 of its troops. This figure slightly increased the following day, as the August 23rd report pointed to a total loss of 605,330 troops. That's another 1,190 soldiers lost in a day. The next day showed a similar single loss day, with a reported 1,160 casualties. With this number, Russia lost a total of 606,490 troops. From August 25th to 27th, the total number of lost soldiers increased by 2,420. This means that the figure of 610,100 lost soldiers was reported on August 27th. On the last day prior to writing the script for this video, August 27th, Russia lost another 1,090 soldiers, leading to the 611,190 figure we mentioned a few times. So in total, that's 8,180 soldiers lost in a single week, or an average of 1,168 troops per day. Now let's say this loss rate continues uninterrupted. At an average of 1,168 troops lost per day, the staggering figure of 1 million casualties would be reached within 332 days, on July 26, 2025. If we use the figures coming from the US Defense Department as a starting point and keep the same loss rate, it will only take Russia 232 days to have 1 million of its soldiers wiped from the battlefield. This gives us the grim milestone of April 17, 2025. That's pretty much on par with the predictions of various experts, including Michael Clarke, a British academic who specializes in defense studies. In his interview with Times Radio, a British digital radio station, Professor Clarke claimed that Russia's troop losses could even reach 1 million by the end of 2024, given how little Putin cares for the human cost of his devastating military campaign. The new Chief of the General Staff of the British Army, General Sir Roland Walker, has laid out even more pessimistic forecasts for the Russian troops. General Walker believes that Putin will sacrifice between 1.5 and 1.8 million people in total to achieve his military goals in Ukraine, which is seizing the 4 primary regions or oblasts – Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk, and Zaporizhia. His exact words were, "At the current rate of attrition of dead and wounded, that puts Russia probably well north of 1.5 million casualties to take the 4 oblasts in Ukraine, with untold billions of lost equipment." He also pointed out the absurdity of such a colossal human cost for a strategic aim that increasingly seems both unreachable and irrational. As General Walker put it, there have got to be more things for Russia to worry about than losing the best part of 1.5 to 1.8 million people for a slice of Ukraine with the way the world is going. Unfortunately, as things currently stand, it doesn't seem like it. In fact, it seems that Russia isn't particularly worried about losing all these troops either, although to be fair, the numbers coming from the Kremlin tell a whole different story. The only time the Kremlin publicly acknowledged its troop casualties was in early 2023, and the figure reported was almost insulting in its inaccuracy. At the time, the Kremlin claimed a mere 6,000 Russian soldiers had been killed in Ukraine, a figure that starkly contrasted independent estimates suggesting numbers tens of thousands higher. The disconnect between the official Kremlin figures and the actual losses on the battlefield only deepens the sense of tragedy, as the true scale of human suffering remains hidden behind propaganda and misinformation. Luckily, some Russian independent media outlets have taken great risks to report more accurate figures. As soon as the shameful 6,000 figure came out, Mika Golubovsky, an editor with the now banned Media Zona, immediately disputed it. Closely working with BBC Russia and relying on new graves in Russian cemeteries and open-source information from official reports, newspaper, and social media, Media Zona reported that over 50,000 Russian troops had died in Ukraine. That's 8 times more than what the Kremlin had claimed. Despite the inherent danger of challenging the official narrative in Russia, Golubovsky and other journalists continued their brave reporting. On July 5, 2024, both Media Zona and another independent media outlet, Meduza, published that approximately 120,000 Russian troops had died since the start of the invasion. That's pretty much on par with the figure that the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces reported at the time. The July 5th report from the staff put the total figure of killed and injured soldiers at 548,580. Using the deaths to injured ratio proposed by The Economist between 1 to 3 and 1 to 4, this suggests that between 109,716 and 137,145 Russian troops have been killed in action. Thanks to a slip-up from December 2023, it's safe to assume that Putin is well aware of the true scale of Russian troop losses, but he simply doesn't care. As Yevgenia Chirikova, an exiled Russian environmental activist, puts it, the growing number of killed and maimed on both sides does not bother Putin at all. Until Russian troops receive a tough rebuff in Ukraine, no changes will happen. But if Putin is so indifferent to this staggering human cost, why not just report it accurately? Why not use it to rally the nation around a narrative of sacrifice and patriotism, painting the war as a heroic struggle for Russia's survival? Well, this type of spin would have been possible some tens of thousands of dead soldiers ago. Now reporting actual figures can only backfire, revealing the full extent of the disaster that Putin's regime has tried so hard to conceal. But wait a minute, shouldn't the Russian people be well aware that their friends, family members, and neighbors are dropping like flies in Ukraine? Well, they are. But that's people outside Russia's 2 largest cities, Moscow and St. Petersburg. You see, Putin has been very careful not to conscript people from these major cities. Why? Because this way, he shields the urban elite from the direct impacts of the war, preventing a potential backlash from those who have the power to question and challenge his decisions. Additionally, not drafting young men from Moscow or St. Petersburg has caused many wealthy Russians to return to these cities after previously fleeing them to avoid the draft, thus offsetting the economic damage done by Western sanctions. But if Muscovites aren't the ones dying on the Ukrainian battlefield, who is? Who makes up the bulk of the hundreds of thousands of Russian troop casualties? To put it simply, they're troops that the Kremlin doesn't care about. Contract soldiers, foreigners, convicts, reservists, they're the ones filling the ranks and bearing the brunt of the casualties. As far as contract soldiers, or kontraktniki, as they're called in Russia, go, they receive little sympathy from the public or the Kremlin. After all, they chose to enlist and are well paid for their service. As Sergei Krivenko, a human rights activist from Moscow, puts it, ordinary people do not feel particularly sorry for them, and judging by the measures implemented by the Kremlin, Putin doesn't either. In May 2022, the 40-year age limit for contract soldiers was abolished, allowing applicants up to the age of 65 to enlist. Now you might wonder, why would anyone in their 60s willingly head to a conflict zone? The answer lies in the desperate economic circumstances faced by many Russians. For some, the prospect of a well-paying contract job in the military becomes a lifeline amidst financial hardship. In this regard, the broadening of eligibility reflects a grim calculus. When the cost of war becomes unsustainable, the Kremlin is willing to pull from increasingly desperate or less privileged demographics, prioritizing immediate military needs over long-term human costs. To make this brutal calculus possible, the Kremlin has been offering a monthly salary of at least $2,300. To put this figure into perspective, you need to know two facts. One, the salary of a contract soldier before the war in Ukraine was around $360. And two, the national average income in Russia is roughly $900 a month. And that's in regions that are better off. In poorer regions, it's half of that, $450. Throw the one-off recruitment bonus of at least $2,200 and high payouts in the event of disability, $33,000, and death, $55,000 into the mix, and it becomes clear why the Kremlin's offer is so tempting to those in desperate financial straits. That's also why the Kremlin is constantly hiking up the target figures for kontraktniki. In March 2020, Russia had approximately 405,000 of these soldiers. This figure was expected to rise to 500,000 by 2027. But then Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, so the target figures dramatically increased, while the time frame for achieving them significantly shortened. In December 2022, it was announced that 695,000 contract soldiers will be serving in the Russian armed forces by 2026. A year later, in December 2023, the number was increased to 745,000 troops by 2027. Even with all the incentives, it's easy to see why these figures are unlikely to be met without significant strain. That's why the Kremlin resorted to another shameful tactic, coercing individuals who might otherwise have never volunteered for service. In this sense, the war in Ukraine has started to resemble the Chechen wars, which were primarily fought by forced conscripts. As Krivenko puts it, these soldiers were sent to slaughter, which caused tension and backlash in society, even to the point of creating social movements. However, the Moscow elites are unlikely to launch any sort of social movements for the bulk of the troops coerced into conscription. Why? Because these are primarily made up of foreigners and convicts. According to numerous media reports, foreigners have been coerced to join the ranks of the Russian armed forces in one of three ways. First, they were deceived about the nature of their prospective employment. Second, they were promised Russian citizenship after only a year of service. Third, they were found guilty of breaking Russian law and given the choice between serving a prison sentence and serving in the war. The first disgraceful way is how a 21-year-old from Sri Lanka found himself on the Ukrainian battlefield. He joined the Russian armed forces for the second reason, receiving Russian citizenship, and was told he would only be employed in a non-combat role. Instead, he was thrust into the front lines, far from the safe, supportive role he'd been promised. That's how he ended up wounded and captured in Ukraine, which is why he also decided to share his story with DW, a German state-owned broadcaster under the watchful eye of Ukrainian military personnel. When he was first sent to the outskirts of the Russian-occupied Ukrainian city of Donetsk, he told his commander that he wanted to return to Sri Lanka. However, he was told that doing so could land him in prison for 15 years per the contract he had signed. So he stayed put, together with dozens of other citizens from India, Kyrgyzstan, Nepal and Tajikistan, all of whom were similarly trapped and betrayed by the Russian military's duplicitous promises. Besides false promises, the Kremlin also showed it had no problem changing the rules of the game whenever it felt like it. Before the war, foreign military recruits had to complete a 5-year contract in the armed forces to obtain Russian citizenship. Once Russian soldiers started dying in bulk, this period was reduced to only 1 year of service. But here's the kicker. Sure, they will receive citizenship after a year, however they'll still have to continue serving, as Putin stipulated that contracts of all kontraktniki will remain valid until the end of his so-called special military operation in Ukraine. During this period, no contracts can be cancelled, and all of those about to expire must be renewed. In other words, foreign fighters don't get to start over in a new country, they get to die as Russians. Russian convicts went through something similar. Initially, the Kremlin was recruiting convicts by promising them a pardon after serving for 6 months, even if they had been convicted of the most violent crimes. However, as the war dragged on and casualties mounted, the rules changed. The only way for most of these convicts to receive a clean slate was to serve until the end of the war in Ukraine. Also, for many of them, a full pardon was off the table, with only a reduction in their sentences or some other form of leniency being offered. Now, some might see this as just, as people who committed heinous crimes shouldn't be allowed to escape their past so easily. However, the fate of these individuals should be viewed in a greater context. Their situation shows just how easy it is for the Kremlin to exploit the power it inevitably holds over those in desperate circumstances. These prison recruits have not only been thrust into a perilous conflict under false assurances, but they've been practically used as cannon fodder in a war that offers them no real chance of survival or redemption. Ever since Putin ordered the now late Yevgeny Prigozhin to start recruiting prisoners in June 2022, these inmates turned soldiers became prime meat for the Kremlin's grinder. According to the BBC, the inmates recruited by Prigozhin survived in Ukraine for an average of 3 months. Those recruited by Russia's Ministry of Defense after its rift with Prigozhin survived for only 2 months on average. Though several conclusions can be drawn based on the difference between the two figures, the only one that matters is that both the ministry and the Wagner Group, previously led by Prigozhin, treated convicts as nothing more than an expendable force to be thrown into battle. As one soldier who wasn't part of the storm platoons made up entirely of convicts puts it, "Storm fighters, they're just meat." This brings us to another crucial aspect to discuss. How are all these tens of thousands of soldiers dying in Ukraine? By now, the number one way Russian troops are being killed in Ukraine is probably obvious: the infamous meat grinder military tactic. And if that name isn't graphic enough for you, let's paint a clearer picture. The meat grinder refers to the brutal, attritional approach where waves of soldiers are sent into fiercely contested areas, often under relentless artillery fire and close-quarters combat. This strategy is designed to wear down the enemy through sheer numbers and reveal its firing positions, but it comes at a horrific cost. After employing this strategy in the second year of the war in Ukraine, the Russian body count increased by nearly 25%. However, Russia also scored some significant victories in Avdiivka and Bakhmut in eastern Ukraine. While helping Russian armed forces to capture Bakhmut in the spring of 2023, the Wagner Group lost 22,000 of its soldiers due to this merciless tactic. And that's where the problem lies. The semblance of success has only added more bodies into the meat grinder. The worst part, the Kremlin is so blinded by these fleeting triumphs that it continues to perpetuate this devastating tactic in Kharkiv, even though it's already proven unsuccessful in the region. The meat grinder tactic also failed in the Battle of Vuhledar, which is still being waged in the Donetsk region of Ukraine. According to the Institute for the Study of War, these ineffective human wave-style frontal assaults have been unsuccessful in the city due to challenging terrain, a lack of combat power, and failure to surprise Ukrainian forces. From this quote alone, two more elements that have been sowing death among the Russian troops become apparent: the lack of combat power and the mighty Ukrainian forces. As far as the first element goes, there have been numerous reports that Russian troops are sent to the front with insufficient training and equipment, and that's putting it lightly. The BBC reports that some of the prisoners recruited for the war in Ukraine had to beg their relatives to buy them proper uniforms and boots. And if the Russian military can't provide something as basic as adequate gear for its troops, it's hardly surprising that they are woefully equipped with inadequate weapons and munitions. According to Vladimir Grubnik, a Russian war supporter and blogger, many soldiers were sent to combat with rifles unsuitable for modern warfare. Others received broken rifles, which can't be either repaired or replaced. Throw the lack of a proper kit and medical supplies into the mix, and you'll understand the shock in Grubnik's words. What a foot soldier should do on the front line without a first aid kit, a spade to dig a trench, and with a broken rifle is a big mystery. You might recall the famous quote, "Wars may be fought with weapons, but they are won by men." Right about now, let us stop you there. The soldiers fighting for Russia in Ukraine can barely call themselves that. The only thing that sets these individuals apart from regular people is a fortnight of military training, if that. There are no professional and highly skilled soldiers fighting for their country anymore. No, they're already dead. Now there are only poorly trained individuals recruited with a single goal in mind: to send as many soldiers to the front line as quickly as possible. And what will happen to those soldiers at the front line? That isn't Putin's concern. His only concern is the figures that he can use to boast about Russia's might, but the world sees right through this propaganda. In a statement released on July 12, 2024, the UK Ministry of Defence slammed this approach as ineffective. The statement said, "Although this new approach has increased pressure on the front lines, an effective Ukrainian defense and a lack of Russian training reduces Russia's ability to exploit any tactical successes despite attempting to stretch the front line further." Again, there's the crucial element that has led to many Russian soldiers perishing: an effective Ukrainian defense. Ever since Kyiv didn't fall in a matter of days as initially predicted, one thing became abundantly clear: Ukrainians aren't going down without a fight. And let us tell you, they might be sacrificing a lot, but they're also taking numerous Russian soldiers with them. Telegram, the messaging platform prevalent in Russia, is often flooded by desperate accounts of the surviving Russians about how their units are being terrorized by Ukrainian drones, machine guns, and artillery. However, the Kremlin is known to adapt and overcome, and recently it came up with a new idea of how to locate and neutralize Ukrainian forces, showering them with fire. And to no surprise, this approach involves sacrificing more soldiers. But this time it's not waves of soldiers being sent in to overwhelm a specific position. This time, small detachments of troops are dismounting from their vehicles and advancing on foot toward the Ukrainian firing position. And no, this isn't some kind of Mission Impossible approach, where precision and stealth rule the day. Instead, these soldiers are relentlessly pushed forward to essentially be sacrificed in an effort to locate the Ukrainian firing positions and hit them with artillery. Now, Russia might have substantially more citizens in Ukraine, but it still can't keep up this horrific strategy forever. The staggering loss of life and the constant need for fresh recruits are taking a toll, revealing the limits of a strategy built on sacrifice and brutality. For now, the Kremlin is effortlessly feeding the meat grinder with fresh meat on a regular basis, recruiting up to 30,000 new soldiers a month. But soon the pool of available recruits will dwindle, and the brutal reality of the conflict will come crashing down, leaving the Kremlin to grapple with the consequences of its unrelenting and deadly tactics. Putin is seemingly well aware of this fact, which is why the Russian armed forces are pushing quite hard to make real progress before they run out of time. But the lack of troops isn't the only thing holding them back. The Russian armed forces have also tried to apply pressure everywhere all at once during their summer offensive, causing them to stretch their resources thin and fail to achieve any sustained gains. In a month or two, the weather will also join the fray, further complicating their efforts. Once the heavy rain starts and the ground gets wet, the muddy terrain will become treacherous for both infantry and vehicles. This will not only hamper movement, but also make it difficult to execute any effective combat operation, which the Russians struggle to do even without the rain. And of course, there's always the fact that Russia is gradually plateauing its arms production, leaving the military with fewer resources to replace destroyed munitions and equipment. The relentless pace of the war in Ukraine, combined with sanctions and production bottlenecks, means that the Kremlin's war machine isn't as self-sustaining as it once was. The front lines are practically eating through military stockpiles faster than they can be replenished, forcing Russia into a dangerous reliance on outdated Soviet-era weaponry and fragile foreign supply chains from China, North Korea, and Iran. In other words, Russia isn't only running out of soldiers, it's running out of everything. No matter how many men Putin throws into the fire, the war is bleeding the country dry. Still, the troop losses are undoubtedly the most tragic and horrifying reality of all. Each new conscript is sent to the front with less training, fewer supplies, and dwindling hope. Russia's war machine, once feared, now consumes its own people faster than it can replace them. These soldiers aren't just losing battles, they're being swallowed whole by a war that has no end in sight. And the most terrifying part, as more lives are sacrificed, nearing the 1 million mark, the Kremlin continues to push forward, turning a blind eye to the devastation and leaving nothing but a wasteland of broken men and shattered families in its wake. But what is your stance on these soldiers? Do you see them as victims of a ruthless regime or mere instruments of war, complicit in their own destruction? And when do you see the 1 million troop mark being passed? By the end of 2024 or sometime during 2025? Share your thoughts and opinions in the comments section below, and thank you for watching the video. Now go and check out Shocking Death Toll of the Ukraine War, or click this other video instead.